This section describes the Japanese village. Until just 100 years ago, more than 90% of human life was lived through agriculture. In other words, a village where agriculture is practiced is all that people have. In the previous issue, I explained about towns in Edo. This time, I will explain about villages in the early Edo period. The long period of warring states had ended and peace had come to Japan. In the process, the shape of villages throughout Japan changed dramatically. During the warring states period, farmers in various regions were not just farmers, but when war broke out, they fought as soldiers. Some of the farmers who liked to fight were taken up by the samurai for their bravery. However, Hideyoshi Toyotomi, who unified Japan, implemented the Taiko land survey and sword hunting, and his policy forbade the transfer of occupations, with farmers being farmers and samurai being warriors. Ieyasu Tokugawa, who established the Edo shogunate, also pushed this policy even more strongly. The shogunate demanded an even stricter adherence to the status system. When the Edo shogunate opened and the Toyotomi family fell, a period of peace began. The Edo shogunate allowed the daimyo to govern themselves. Each daimyo was allowed to govern his own territory as he wished. The tax rates imposed on farmers were also different for each fief. As explained in a previous video, the Edo shogunate had a policy of allowing daimyo to have themselves and their wives and children live in Edo on a yearly rotation basis. This policy was intended to prevent daimyo from revolting and to ensure that they would not have the financial resources to revolt. The daimyo did not live in Edo alone, but took many retainers with them to Edo and lived there. All of these expenses were borne by the daimyo themselves. In order to lighten this burden, the daimyo began to think about how to take more taxes from the peasants in their territories. What ensued was the great transformation of the village during the Edo period. Until the Warring States period, a farmer qualified to pay taxes in rural Japan consisted of a family of approximately 20 people, including his relatives and servants. Only one person, the family head, was obligated to pay taxes. This type of family structure was a very effective system in the Warring States period. It was easy to select farmers to go to war in such a large family farming operation. However, when peaceful times came, farmers were no longer sent to war in this way. In order to collect more taxes, daimyo needed more independent farmers. In the early Edo period, large-scale development of new rice paddies took place. The purpose was to increase the daimyo's agricultural income. To accomplish this, it was necessary to create more independent farmers. His relatives who worked for the patriarch but did not own land, as well as his servants, took the initiative in developing new rice paddies. The land they cultivated became their land and they became independent farmers. The land that had been cultivated previously was relatively suitable for agriculture, but the land to be newly cultivated was not originally suitable for agriculture. This meant that large-scale flood control work was necessary. These construction techniques were based on the castle building and mining excavation techniques developed during the Warring States period. In the 16th century, Hideyoshi Toyotomi surveyed a total of about 1.5 million hectares of agricultural land in Japan, which doubled to about 3 million hectares 100 years later. The basis for the development of the Edo period was this agrarian reform. More farmland means more people to feed, and in the early Edo period, the population increased significantly in proportion to the development of new rice paddies. Let us now turn to the main topic of this article, the state of farming villages in the Edo period. As mentioned earlier, the farmer's relatives and servants who had worked under him until the Warring States period became independent and were able to work as tax-paying farmers again. They are called onhyakuseo. The structure of the family of about 20 people who had worked for the patriarch changed. The family now consists of the onhyakuseo, his parents, and his children. Onhyakuseo were obligated to pay taxes and were allowed to participate in village self-government. The collection of taxes was charged to the village by the lord. Each village had a suoya, who was in charge of the village. Although they were peasants, they were originally wealthy farmers and samurai during the Warring States period. Those who followed the daimyo into town became samurai, while those who remained in the village became suoya. They were often wealthier than ordinary samurai. They were in charge of the village and determined the allocation of taxes according to the area cultivated by the village farmers. They were also responsible for communicating the daimyo's policies to the village peasants and ensuring that they were followed. In addition, official village documents, such as letters of contact from the daimyo and transfers of villagers, had to be stamped by the village headman, and this required a certain level of education for the suoya. The method of selecting this suoya varied from region to region, and in some cases the same family succeeded to the position from generation to generation, while in other cases the suoya was chosen by election. The rulers were jointly and severally liable for the payment of taxes. Villagers formed groups of 5, and if one person deserted the village, the 4 would take responsibility and pay the tax for the 5 members. The group of 5 was created for the purpose of mutual help and mutual supervision. While there are many similarities between the villages that emerged in the Muromachi period and those of the Edo period, there are also differences. In the Muromachi period, farmers united and became self-governing as a means of resistance against the rulers. In the Edo period, villages were controlled by suoya, who acted as representatives of those in power. Villages were allowed a certain degree of autonomy, led by the suoya, but rebellion was not permitted. The suoya was both a peasant and an administrative officer. The village was a community of destiny for the peasants, who were obliged to pay taxes at the village level. The peasants lived in the village with the idea of helping each other and not causing each other trouble. Those who broke the village rules were subjected to the severe punishment of murahakabu. Murahakabu meant that the family was not recognized as a member of the village, and was forbidden to participate in village gatherings or to use the mountains and waterways, which were common property of the village. The mountains provided the firewood needed for daily life, and without access to waterways, farming was virtually impossible. The word murahakabu comes from the root meaning to cut off all involvement except for fire and funeral ceremonies. To avoid such sanctions, farmers followed the village rules. These village rules in murahakabu, which began in the Edo period, remained strong until the end of World War II in the 1950s. It is believed that the Japanese tendency to place importance on cooperation with others and to avoid stating one's own opinion strongly reflects this rural lifestyle that has continued from the early modern period. Countries ruled by daimyo, the shogunate, administered their rural communities through suoya. Those in power forbade peasants from moving to other countries, simply because it would mean fewer taxpayers. For this reason, barriers were set up at the borders, and permission was required to pass through them. For this reason, it was rare for ordinary farmers to meet with farmers from other countries. This would mean that a culture of national disconnection was formed in various parts of Japan. This led to the creation of unique dialects in each region. Although words spoken in close proximity have similar dialects, each region that formed a clan produced a slightly different dialect. The reason why there are so many regional dialects in Japan is largely due to this disconnect between clans during the Edo period. During the Edo period, new agricultural land was developed rapidly, but the agricultural technology to support this development also improved dramatically. The daimyo took the lead in large-scale flood control projects, converting land previously unsuitable for agriculture into farmland. The farmers also divided their land into 3 parts and let one part of the land rest without crops to store nutrients for the soil. They spread human excrement as organic fertilizer on the fields, and they also began to spread fish such as sardines on the fields. Agricultural machinery was also developed, which greatly simplified the threshing and refining of rice after harvest. This development of agricultural technology led to a dramatic increase in the rice harvest. The rice harvest exceeded Japan's demand for rice. In the mid-Edo period, The large cities of Edo and Osaka attracted many people, and demand for various goods increased. Villages across the country began to produce crops with high commercial value other than rice. Cotton, rapeseed, and indigo, a raw material for dyes, were produced, and the standard of living of the common people of Edo rose dramatically. In this issue, I explained the formation of villages in the early to mid-Edo period. In the next issue, I will discuss the famine and peasant uprising in Edo. If you enjoyed this article, please subscribe to our channel and click the like button.